Well, my name is Gary Van Epson. I'm the founder and director of the James House here in Willmar, Minnesota. We opened the James House up in 2003 as a result of my experience with not only as a recovered alcoholic, but also my experience as a counselor in treatment. I had been, my last treatment came in 1994. And in 1997, I became a counselor, and for several years had worked in the field of chemical dependency, and really started to notice the ineffectiveness of people working a 12-step program, and my experience with the 12 steps, I was so blessed to have a sponsor who worked the 12 steps directly from the big book and as done and passed down in 1940. In 1940, the success rates of people coming into AA were, there were three main groups going, Akron, Cleveland, and New York. The New York was the lowest with a 75% success rate, and Akron, of course, was the highest with a 93% success rate. Therefore, in the steps, as we see in the how it works in the big book, it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And again, I was so fortunate to have a sponsor who had learned the 12 steps, going through these 12 steps out of the big book as it was done in 1940. Dr. Bob, one of the founders of AA, sponsored a fellow by the name of Clarence S. from Cleveland. And Clarence had a long line of sponsees, and this is the way he took people through the 12 steps. In my prior treatments and attempts at recovery, these 12 steps, they just, and I think for so many people, that a lot of it just didn't make sense. To talk about step one, powerless over alcohol or drugs, and again, we need to, in going through the 12 steps the AA way, so many people, well, I'm a drug addict. Just replace the word alcohol with the drug. Or if you're a member of Al-Anon, replace the word alcohol with the alcoholic. Or if you have any other obsessions, the 12-step program is the most used self-help program in the country. They use it for a number of different compulsions or obsessions. Gamblers, of course, all of the drugs. Al-Anon works the same steps. They have Emotions Anonymous, which are based off of this. So most of the self-help programs are based on these steps. But the importance of working it as originally done is huge, and we've kind of lost that somewhere over the years. We're going to cover some of that stuff in doing it. Some of the things that for me, when I came into treatment for my last time, I had been to AA. I'd been to AA meetings a lot. I'd been to treatment before. None of it was very effective because I sat down in an AA meeting and I had no clue what they were talking about. What is it to be powerless over alcohol? I thought I was just the meanest, nastiest person, that there was just really something morally wrong with me that I could not stop drinking. And I came into AA with this, and just going into the meetings until I found a sponsor to take me through these steps, the meetings were very ineffective. In fact, coming into my last treatment, being at a point where physically they had told me, my doctor had informed me that if I continued to drink, I would not last, I would not live more than just a few months. Even being sober, that my life expectancy was very short because of the damage that had already been done to me physically. Spiritually, I totally bankrupt. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with God. I had grown up in a very religious family, very religious community. Looking back, my family was terrific. I am the only alcoholic. I'm the youngest of 6 children, the only alcoholic. But the religion that I grew up with just didn't work for me. I attached it to God, and therefore I wanted nothing to do with God. Being that sick, when I first sat down with my counselor, and he talked about my opinion of AA and God, I absolutely told him, and of course I'm sitting there, physically I'm still withdrawing. During the course of that time, they forced me to go to AA and to go to AA meetings. I did go, and again finding it very ineffective, this AA stuff, it doesn't work for me. Finally, I went to a Big Book meeting where I met my sponsor. And that first night that I was at this meeting, as they were describing step 1, I thought, you know, this makes sense to me. I understand this much better. So he became my sponsor, worked me through the steps this way, and I now teach the steps both in treatment. I'm no longer a counselor in treatment. My job specifically is to teach the steps as done in 1940. And I've been doing this now since 2003. The James House itself is based on these 12 steps. It's part of our program to successfully complete these 12 steps as done in 1940, and with God, the Christian God, as the cornerstone or the centerpiece of step 3 in turning our will and life over to the care of God. So we're going to start out today with step 1 and my experience with step 1, and throughout this process we're going to be talking about my experience. My experience may not be your experience. The beauty of the 12 steps is that they allow people to experience these steps and to experience a spiritual awakening as an individual. My spiritual awakening may not be the same as your spiritual awakening, and that's okay. My purpose is just to take you through these steps as done in 1940 and allow you to experience these God as these steps would lead you. So we do start out with step 1. Step 1, of course, this came for me in the How It Works. Looking at step 1, we notice that there's a hyphen between powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. And I have one of those weird minds that when I see a hyphen, it's like, wait a minute, why is there a hyphen and not a comma or a period? But that hyphen indicates that we're going to be talking about 2 separate things, but the same theme. And the same theme here is that is the powerlessness. That's the bottom line of step 1, is that we are powerless, but we're going to be talking about 2 completely separate parts of it. It also bothered me that after the How It Works, we go through the ABC, you know, that we were alcoholic and couldn't control our own lives, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, and that God could and would if he were sought. It then says, being convinced, we were now at step 3. My question was, where's step 1 and 2? This, of course, is found on page 60 of the Big Book. And I said, well, what happened to step 1 and 2? Because the rest of these steps now are described, steps 3 through 12 are described in the following pages. To understand that, I needed to read the first part of the Big Book. Something that's kind of, you know, for an alcoholic, we like to read the first page and the last page, and we sort of skip around. I needed to find out about step 1 and step 2 that came to believe in a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity before I'm ready for step 3. Also interesting with the Big Book, the 12 steps are completely described in the first 103 pages of the Big Book. So many people have struggled so much with the step 3 that made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God. And they have such a struggle with that. I came to realize that of the 103 pages plus 8 pages of the doctor's opinion, 43 pages are dedicated strictly to step 1. 23 pages are step 2. Step 3 is 1 paragraph. So all of a sudden I started to think maybe there's not as much to this step 3. Now there is a lot to step 3, don't get me wrong, but that if I've prepared myself properly by doing step 1 and 2 right, step 3 will be pretty simple. So we go into the big book, and it starts in the doctor's opinion. And I, of course, use the 3rd edition of the big book. The page numbers may be a little bit different with some of these. So I'm going to try to also give you the 4th edition part as I go, but most of this will be from the 3rd edition. Starting on page in the 3rd edition, it's page, and it's Roman numerals 24. In the 4th edition, this will be Roman numeral 26. The 4th edition is 2 off, or 2 later. So if I say 24, it's going to be 26 in the 4th edition. But this comes after the first letter from Dr. William Silkworth, who was one of the primary physicians in the country at that time in working with alcoholics and addicts. That he is the physician or the psychiatrist who worked with Bill Wilson, again one of the co-founders of AA, on 3 separate trips to the hospital, in which Dr. Silkworth worked out of, and on the 3rd trip, Bill W. had this spiritual experience. But William Silkworth says that in his letter, he's going to talk about a couple of different parts to step 1. The big book then says, in this statement, Dr. Silkworth, speaking of Dr. Silkworth, he confirms that we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It didn't satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. So in the beginning here on page 24, Roman numeral 24, he's already setting us up that we're going to be talking about 2 different parts, in that he says the body is as abnormal as the mind. In other words, there's a physical part to this addiction. So when we talk today about the disease concept, it's included in this first part of step 1, that I'm powerless over alcohol. So the doctor's opinion then on the next page, 25 or Roman numeral 25, 27, starts talking about the physical part of this disease. It says, of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor. So he's telling us here that there's a physical craving for alcohol, and that this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. In 1939, when the big book was written, there were no such thing as detox centers. Today we're very familiar with detox centers, treatment centers. 1939, they didn't have those things. So when it talks about hospital procedures or hospitalization, today we could put that into a class of either detox or treatment. But the main thing here is he's telling us that there's a physical craving for liquor that happens to the alcoholic. He goes on to say that we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is the manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So now he brings in the physical part, an allergy, that the action of alcohol. So let's ask ourselves the question, what is the action of alcohol that he's talking about here? He describes it in the next sentence, the phenomenon of craving. And that this never occurs in the average temperate drinkers. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up in them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. So we need to talk, there's some things that we need to talk about here. First of all, what is an allergy? An allergy, as described in the dictionary, is defined as an abnormal reaction to something. So my mind, and again, having kind of one of those weird minds, I need to make that simpler, and I need to make it easy. So I think about being allergic to cats. And if you're allergic to cats, the manifestation of that allergy is if you pet the cat, what happens to you? You know, your eyes get runny, your nose gets runny, you have a hard time breathing, you might get clammy, and all of this weird stuff happens to us physically when we pet a cat. So what's the weird thing that happens to me physically when I drink alcohol? That's this phenomenon of craving. What the phenomenon of craving is that when I put alcohol into my system, this phenomenon of craving kicks in, and I'm absolutely powerless to say no to more alcohol. And an example of that for me, and a couple of different examples. Let's first talk about the drugs that are placed with this allergy, that are kind of put into the same class, if you will, of alcohol. Cocaine, methamphetamine, crack, marijuana, any of those drugs, the phenomenon of craving kicks in after you put it into your system. Opiates are the opposite. As the drug leaves your system, the phenomenon of craving kicks in, and another opiate fixes that craving. But the phenomenon of craving is still the same. And again, this is thinking a bit out of the box. Since 1939, of course, we've had a lot of different drugs and problems arise from drugs. But this phenomenon of craving, as an alcoholic, how many times I would go to the bar, maybe after work, and particularly stressful day after work, and the normal person would say, let's go have a drink, and I just need to go and have a drink or two to calm down, to settle my nerves a bit. So I go to the bar at 5 o'clock with absolutely every intention of being at an event at 7 o'clock that night. Maybe there's something with the kids in school, or some other event that I'm determined to make it to at 7 o'clock. And so I go to the bar at 5 o'clock to have a drink or two. So I have that 2 drinks, and now it's 6 o'clock, and I'm thinking, well, I can just, instead of going home for supper, I'll just have a bite to eat here at the bar. That way I can have another drink. So I replace the food, supper takes second place, maybe I do have a hamburger or whatever at the bar, but now I order a third drink. And now it's 6:30, in this half hour, I now have a half an hour to make it to this event. And I start to think, well, you know, I'm really not that dirty. I don't think I need to take a shower before I go to this event. And besides, I'm just going to sneak in the back door, sit in the back row. I'm not going to be talking to anyone. I'm going to get there, just sit in the back row and leave early, and I won't have to talk to anyone. So if I don't take a shower, no one will even notice. And now I have drink number 4. All of a sudden, it's 9 o'clock at night, and I'm trying to figure out what happened. I'm still at the bar, I'm drunk, and I did not make it to that event that I absolutely planned to be at. The phenomenon of craving. Once I put that drink into my system, the phenomenon of craving developed, and I could not stop at 1 or 2 drinks. Maybe the easiest way for me to explain it is with cocaine. And with cocaine addicts, are you familiar with the term carpet surfers? Have you ever been to a party where people were doing lines of cocaine and all of a sudden the cocaine is gone? What happens to people when the cocaine is gone? And cocaine addicts especially, and methamphetamine, you kind of laugh because what typically happens is you're going to find some people down on the floor digging for cocaine out of that carpet, that maybe, just maybe, some cocaine got spilt on the floor. And so you'll see people down there with a straw in their nose, crawling around on all fours, snorting up anything that looks white. What else but the phenomenon of craving would describe that? Once they've put it into their system, they have to have more. To watch grown men and women crawl around on a carpet with a straw in their nose, trying to find a little cocaine that might have spilt. How else could you describe that other than a physical reaction called the phenomenon of craving, that they would do something like that? So, or with with taking pills, even with taking opiates, a lot of pills today. The person driving down 494 or a major interstate during traffic hour, and they feel this craving starting to come on because the opiate is starting to leave their system, but they have a bottle of pills handy. So they open up that bottle of pills and they're going to put one in their hand or a couple in their hand so they can take it as they're stuck in the traffic rush. Son of a gun, we had a bump. And the pills go everywhere. What does the opiate addict do? Rather than to just continue on in traffic and wait for an exit ramp or to get home to take it, that opiate addict will immediately go through great lengths to get off to the side of the road to find those pills. And they'll be digging under the seat, in the seat, anywhere to find those pills. That's not normal. The normal person would not be crawling around the floor with a straw in their nose or digging under the seats of their car during traffic hour on a major interstate. That's not normal. So is this phenomenon of craving an abnormal reaction to the drug or to the alcohol? My purpose isn't to tell anyone that they're an alcoholic or an addict. Just ask yourself that simple question. Have I ever experienced this? The book says the average temperate drinker or drug user never experiences the phenomenon of craving. So if it happens to me 1 time in 10, what would that say? Probably that I have this allergy. Now maybe I'm fairly new into drinking. Maybe I'm a young person who's just started drinking or drugging. Maybe I've experienced this once or twice. Maybe it hasn't developed to the point where I experience it every time. But think about that. It never happens to the average temperate drinker, only to the chronic alcoholic. So from this also we understand that it isn't, alcoholism is not about how often I drink, it's about what happens to me when I drink. And I hear that comment a lot. Well, I only drink on weekends. Or, you know, this phenomenon of craving, most of the time I can go to the bar and have a couple of drinks and be just fine. This only happens once in a while. Well, what does the book say? It says that you can never safely use alcohol or drugs in any form. At the bottom of that page, it talks about men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it's injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. And then, of course, after they have succumbed to the desire again, the phenomenon of craving develops and they pass through the well-known stages of a spree. But a couple of interesting things here. The alcoholic or the addict, after a time, cannot differentiate the true from the false. Most alcoholics believe that their life is the only normal one. If you've ever worked as a family member, if you've ever worked with an alcoholic or with an addict, it's so obvious to you that there's a big problem here. To the alcoholic or the addict, they don't see it as a problem. In fact, most alcoholics and addicts would say that you are the one who has the problem. You're the weird one. I remember my first intervention came in 1985, and my family intervened. And I very specifically remember telling my father that I don't have a problem with alcohol. You do. You go to treatment. So here's a family that's sitting around the room going to great lengths and taking an extreme risk in coming to me and confronting me about my drinking. And I was dead serious. I don't have a problem with alcohol. It's you people who are weird because of your religion that doesn't allow a person to have any fun. And all I've learned is that when I drink, I have fun. So you're the weird ones. Does that indicate that I have any ability to differentiate the true from the false? Here's a group of people who absolutely have seen the problems that alcohol has caused me. By this time I had walked out on a beautiful, wonderful wife and 3 little kids. I didn't see that it was a problem. I believed that I was doing them a favor by leaving, by walking out on them. And I truly believed that it was the best thing for me to do, was to leave them so they could get on with their lives and just not be a part of their life anymore. Again, is that true or is that false? Obviously it's false. At that time, I had lost my ability to differentiate the true from the false. So ask yourself the question, has this happened to you? Has the alcoholic life become the only normal one for you? If it has, you may be suffering from a disease that only a spiritual experience will conquer. This it talks about the sensation produced by alcohol that it is so elusive that I continue to drink, even though it's causing me great harm. So I go back to this being allergic to cats. I have never in my life, and maybe somewhere along the line it's happened, I have never seen a person go to jail or to a treatment center to be treated for being allergic to cats and continuing to pet cats. It doesn't happen. If you're allergic to a cat, stay away from cats. It's so simple. If as a father or as a parent of kids, if your child is allergic to cats and you catch your kid sneaking out of the house at midnight to go pet the neighbor's cat, what do? Are you nuts? What's wrong with you? Stop petting the cat. We absolutely believe that there is something mentally wrong with this kid. Well, look in the mirror. I have an allergy towards alcohol. Every time I drink, as the alcoholism for me got worse, and by the end of my drinking career, anytime I would drink, I broke out in handcuffs. And I would go to jail and say, that's it. The drinking is done. Drinking is causing me problems. I'm going to stop drinking. A couple of days later, I go before the judge. The judge says, it's not a real major deal. Don't drink anymore and you can go home. Pay your fine and you can go home. The minute I walk out of that jail with my clothes on, what's the first thing that comes across my mind? I need a drink. It's been a stressful weekend. Again, absolutely convinced that I'm only going to have one or two just to calm my nerves. So I go, I have the one or two. Guess what happens? Phenomenon of craving develops, and I'm off on another spree. And eventually, I'm back in jail again, saying, that's it, I'm done drinking. So, I need to now think about this on the mental terms. Life has become unmanageable. If the normal person ever experienced a legal consequence because of his or her drinking and ended up in jail because of it, the chances are that person would never drink again. They would certainly never end up in jail again because of their drinking. It just wouldn't happen. For me, the alcoholic life became the only normal one. Things like blackouts, going to jail, getting into problems, losing jobs, losing family. It was normal for me. I did not believe that my life was that much different than other people. The alcoholic life had seemed normal. So that second part of step one talks about that unmanageability of our life. So often in treatment, that unmanageability is considered all of the legal consequences, financial, physical problems that I've had. They're all the consequences. We put that into the unmanageable category. That part of step one in the big book doesn't mention anything about the consequences. Of course, we're going to have consequences from it. But the problem being that the mental obsession to drink is so great that I also have no power over the mental obsession. So I've shown in the first part the physical. Once I put a drink into my system, I have no power over the physical part of it. The phenomenon of craving develops, and I'm going to drink more. I have no power over that. The Big Book, in fact, says I cannot safely use drugs or alcohol again because of that physical problem. So again, with the allergy to the cats, it should be so simple. Just don't drink. But then the Big Book talks about that mental obsession. That in spite of all these consequences, in spite of all the negative things that have happened to me, I am powerless to not pick up. I have no mental defense against that first drink. And of course, at the time, as it was happening to me in 1994, or 1993 rather, it didn't occur to me, but when that was presented to me through this part of the step, that there was no mental defense, I went back to, in 1993, my youngest daughter was 10 years old and she had cancer. And was at the end. She had been battling the cancer for over 2 years. But towards the end of her life, she asked me, "Dad, when you come to visit me, would you please, if you've been drinking, please don't hug me anymore or get too close to me, because the smell of the alcohol makes me sick. So please, if you're going to come to visit me, please don't drink. Or if you are drinking, please don't come close to me." This happened about a month before she actually died. I swore, I made a vow as sincerely as I have ever made a promise in my life, that I would not drink again when I came to see her, or at least I would stop drinking until she either got well or unfortunately died. I went out with every bit of resolve in me, absolutely convinced that I was not going to drink. 6 hours later, guess what? I'm drinking again. There was regardless of the excuses, anything, I had made such a promise, and as so many do, that promise is sincere, but I have no, at this stage of my alcoholism, there was absolutely no mental defense against taking that first drink. I was not able to hold my daughter, hug her, or come close to her until she had died. Because for me to come close to her, I was not able to stop drinking, and it made her sick. Would that indicate to you that I had any power over that obsession to drink? Think about things in your own life. Have you ever promised your wife or your children or a family member, a boss, a good friend, that was it? You were going to stop drinking or using drugs. And for a lot of people, maybe that works for a while. Maybe they can put together a week or two or a month or even 3 months. But at some point in time, that sensation, the effect produced by alcohol, is so overwhelming, that obsession becomes so strong that I cannot say no to taking that first drink. Again, I take that drink, every intention of just having a drink or two, or taking a couple of hits off a joint, or doing a short line of coke. Once it gets into my system, the phenomenon of craving develops, and I'm on a spree again. So we need to ask ourselves some of those questions. Has that ever happened to me? And again, I hope that for you, the extreme of with a dying daughter, that you never get to that extreme, or that you haven't. But think about it in making a promise to a loved one, someone that you think very dearly of. You've made a solemn promise, and yet that obsession became so strong, there was no mental defense against it. Bill talks about, in his experience, shortly before he sobered up for the last time, he had a visit during one of his drinking sprees. Bill is drunk, and his wife Lois had met an old friend of Bill's, one who he had grown up with, had drank with. This is the man, and his name was Ebby Thatcher. This is a man that drank just like Bill, had every bit as much problems with alcohol as Bill Wilson had. Bill considered him his closest friend. And here, one day, kind of out of the blue, Ebby shows up at Bill's home, and he's sober. And Bill is just astonished by this. He says, my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank direct declaration that God had done for him what he couldn't do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he admitted complete defeat. Then, in effect, had been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Ebby had been sober for 3 months. This, in Bill's mind, was just incomprehensible. How could this have happened? Ebby was just like Bill. He was about to be locked up. He was about to be sent to the asylum, declared hopeless by the doctors. And here Ebby sat before him, and he was sober. And he had been sober for several months. And he had talked to Bill about religion. Bill, at this point, said, had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. Bill is declaring that there was absolutely no power within him that could keep him sober. Of course, we go through Bill's experience with his spiritual awakening. Then in the room of the hospital, we hear about all of these things, but we want to get back to this mental obsession that page, and forgive me here, we have to get to the last page of the More About Alcoholism. Page 43, and this is the regular page numbers now, we're out of the Roman numerals. The very last paragraph in More About Alcoholism says that once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. It's telling us again, there is absolutely no mental defense against taking that first drink. We want to talk about the different stages of alcohol consumption here. and it's found on page 20 and 21 of the big book. Questions that I need to ask myself. It says here on page 20, the last full paragraph on page 20, says moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. So I need to ask myself the question, is that me? Obviously not. I've never been able to take it or leave it alone. Then it describes a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him mentally and physically. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. So it's telling us here that a hard drinker can be affected mentally and physically. And it could cause him to die a few years before his time. So there's going to be some physical problems here. But if a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. To moderate means to control. I need to ask myself the question, is that me? Have I been able to, if sufficiently strong reason came up, am I able to stop or moderate? The answer for me is no. This person may even find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. Remember back in the beginning we talked about medical attention, anything dealing with a hospital procedure or stay. Today would be considered detox or treatment. So this person may even end up in a treatment center being treated for alcoholism. This person can also end up in AA. In AA, the only requirement for membership into AA is a desire to stop drinking. Does a hard drinker have a desire to stop drinking? Yes. He may find AA helpful to him. But he is able to, with sufficient reason, stop or moderate on his own. Then it goes on to say, but what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Does that describe me? For me, yes. I was not able to stop, first of all. I was not able to stop when sufficiently strong reason came up. A daughter near her death is sufficiently strong reason. 6 hours later, I had determined that I'm going to have a drink or two to calm my nerves. What happened? Phenomenon of craving kicks in. Lost control of the amount I consumed once I started to drink. The difference between an alcoholic and a hard drinker. What happens to, and of course here it says the real alcoholic. Earlier in the doctor's opinion, they classified this as the chronic alcoholic. Notice here they've never talked about how much I drank, how often I drank, only what happens to me when I drink or don't drink. When I'm not drinking, I become restless, irritable, and discontent until I can pick up that first drink again. Then the phenomenon of craving kicks in and I'm off on a roll. So I need to ask myself the question, am I this real alcoholic? Because if I am, I'm suffering from a disease that only a spiritual experience will conquer. if I am this chronic alcoholic, there is absolutely nothing that I can do on my own to solve my drinking problem. I have no power over the physical part of the addiction. I also have no power over that mental obsession. So if I have no power, step one guarantees that I'm going to drink again. Why? Because I have no power to say no to that first drink. Once I take that first drink, I have no power to say no to the 18th, because the phenomenon of craving develops and I'm going to drink more. So as we break from here, we need to ask ourselves the question, do I believe that I have any power on my own to not take that first drink, to not take that first line of cocaine, the opiates? Once I've detoxed from opiates, once it's completely out of my system, that phenomenon of craving will not develop unless I put it into my system again. Am I able on my own to just say no? To just don't pet the cat? If I believe that I have any power over this mental obsession or the phenomenon of craving, then the rest of these steps aren't going to be real effective for me. So I really need to give this some thought. Do I have any power to say no on my own, to not pick up that first drink? If the answer is no, I do not have any power, then it's obvious. It is hopeless for me, unless I can find a power source, unless I can tap into some power, as Ebby Thatcher had, to solve my drinking problem. So we give that some thought. Prior to going into step 2, and ask yourselves those questions to solve my drinking problem. So we give that some thought. Prior to going into step 2, and ask yourselves those questions